Good morning. I got up again. It's soon 10 a.m. 10 a.m. So let's continue reading. I just follow this list. History, New York City, boroughs, Bronx, Brooklyn. Let's read list, Queens, Long Island. And let's do it then in the early evening. I can look at the map of New York City in my flight radar again. So I'm low on the money. I'm kind of out of money, so I'm waiting for my YouTube money. Could get about $400. So it's number 6 today, so I can read the whole month. I will get my YouTube money, 25 maybe. So I'm kind of out of money, but I have paid all my bills. But I have a credit card with $3,000. But that will be, I'm not going to make a debt, $1,000. I will not make any credit card debt again. Because if I should go travel, I will need to have some money. So I need a minute to get started. So I did open a lot yesterday. Really open a lot. So we need to start reading and close down again. Of course I cannot have 1,000 web page open. We need to start reading and close. So I need half a minute to get to my bed. The heating was not on this night. I had to check my cell phone.
History of New York City, 1946-1977. Immediately after World War II, New York City became known as one of the world's greatest cities. However, after peaking in population in 1950, the city began to feel the effects of suburbanization brought about by new housing communities such as Levittown, a downturn in industry and commerce as businesses left for places where it was cheaper and easier to operate, an increase in crime, and an upturn in its welfare burden, all of which reached a nadir in the city's fiscal crisis of the 1970s, when it barely avoided defaulting on its obligations and declaring bankruptcy. Post-war, late 1940s through 1950s, edit. As many great cities lay in ruins after World War II, New York City assumed a new global prominence. It became the home of the United Nations headquarters. Built 1947-1952, inherited the role from Paris as center of the art world with abstract expressionism, and became a rival to London in the international finance and art markets. Yet the population declined after 1950, with increasing suburbanization in the New York metropolitan area as pioneered in Levittown, New York. Midtown Manhattan, fueled by post-war prosperity, was experiencing an unprecedented building boom that changed its very appearance. Glass and steel office towers in the new international style began to replace the ziggurat-style towers, built in wedding cake style, of the pre-war era. Also rapidly changing was the eastern edge of the East Village close to FDR Drive. Many traditional apartment blocks were cleared and replaced with large-scale public housing projects. In Lower Manhattan, urban renewal began to take shape around 1960, led by David Rockefeller's construction of the One Chase Manhattan Plaza building. In a built-out city, construction entails destruction. After the old Bogarts, Pennsylvania station was torn down, growing concern for preservation led to the 1965 Landmarks Preservation Commission law. The city's other great train station, Grand Central, was also threatened with demolition but was eventually saved. Meanwhile, New York City's network of highways spread, destroying neighborhoods where African Americans lived under the guidance of the noted urban planner with exceeding biases against certain ethnicities Robert Moses, consequently increasing traffic congestion, traffic pollution, and ruining livelihoods of the people who once lived in vibrant neighborhoods. However, the defeat in 1962 of Moses' planned Lower Manhattan Expressway by community activists led by Jane Jacobs was an indication that Moses would no longer have the free hand in the destruction of livelihoods he had enjoyed in the past. 1960s, edit. During the 1960s, a gradual economic and social decay set in. A symptom of the city's waning competitiveness was the loss of both its longtime resident National League baseball teams to booming California. The Dodgers and the Giants both moved after the 1957 season. A sports void was partially filled with the formation of the Mets in 1962, who played their first 2 seasons at the Polo Grounds, the former home of the Giants, before moving to Shea Stadium in Queens in 1964. The passage of the Federal Immigration Act of 1965, which abolished national origin quotas, set the stage for increased immigration from Asia, which became the basis for New York's modern Asian American community. On the 9th of November, 1965, New York endured a widespread power blackout along with much of eastern North America. The city's ordeal became the subject of the 1968 film, Where Were You When the Lights Went Out? The post-war population shift to the suburbs resulted in the decline of textile manufacturing and other traditional industries in New York, most of which also operated in extremely outdated facilities. With the arrival of container shipping, that industry shifted to New Jersey where there was more room for it. Blue-collar neighborhoods began to deteriorate and become centers of drugs and crime. Strip clubs and other adult businesses started filling Times Square in the late 1960s. In 1966, the U.S. Navy decommissioned the Brooklyn Navy Yard, ending a command going back to the early 19th century. It was sold to the city. The yard continued as a site for shipbuilding for another 11 years. From the 23rd of November to 26, 1966, New York City was covered by a major smog episode, filling the city's air with damaging levels of several toxic pollutants. The smog was caused by a combination of factors, including the use of coal-burning power plants, the heavy traffic on the city's roads, and the widespread use of wood-burning stoves and fireplaces. It was the third major smog in New York City, following events of similar scale in 1953 and 1963. Mayor Lindsay, edit. John Lindsay, a liberal Republican, was a highly visible and charismatic mayor from 1966 to 1973. The city was a national center of protest movements regarding civil rights for black citizens, opposition to the Vietnam War, and the newly emerging feminist and gay movements. There were jolting economic shocks as the post-war prosperity came to an end with many factories and entire industries shutting down. There was a population transition with hundreds of thousands of African Americans and Puerto Ricans moving in, and an exodus of European Americans to the suburbs. Labor unions, especially in teaching, transit, sanitation and construction, fractured over major strikes and internal racial tensions. Strikes and Riots, edit. The Transport Workers Union of America, TWU, led by Mike Quill, shut down the city with a complete halt of subway and bus service on Mayor John Lindsay's first day of office. As New Yorkers endured the transit strike, Lindsay remarked, "I still think it's a fun city," and walked 4 miles, 6 kilometers, from his hotel room to City Hall in a gesture to show it. Dick Scoop, then a columnist for the New York Herald Tribune, coined and popularized the sarcastic term in an article titled "Fun City." In the article, Scoop sardonically pointed out that it was not. The transit strike was the first of many labor struggles. In 1968, the Teachers Union, the United Federation of Teachers, or the UFT, went on strike over the firings of several teachers in a school in Ocean Hill and Brownsville. That same year, 1968, also saw a 9-day sanitation strike. Quality of life in New York reached a nadir during this strike, as mounds of garbage caught fire, and strong winds whirled the filth through the streets. With the schools shut down, the police engaged in a slowdown, firefighters threatening job actions, the city awash in garbage, and racial and religious tensions breaking to the surface. Lindsay later called the last 6 months of 1968 the worst of my public life. The Stonewall riots were a series of spontaneous, violent demonstrations against a police raid that took place in the early morning hours of the 28th of June, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn, in the Greenwich Village neighborhood of New York City. They are frequently cited as the first instance in American history when people in the homosexual community fought back against a government-sponsored system that persecuted sexual minorities, and they have become the defining event that marked the start of the gay rights movement in the United States and around the world. 1970s, edit. By 1970, the city gained notoriety for high rates of crime and other social disorders. A popular song by Cashman and West in the autumn of 1972, "American City Suite," chronicled, in allegorical fashion, the decline in the city's quality of life. The city's subway system was regarded as unsafe due to crime and suffered frequent mechanical breakdowns. Prostitutes and pimps frequented Times Square, while Central Park became feared as the site of muggings and rapes. Homeless persons and drug dealers occupied boarded up and abandoned buildings. The New York City Police Department was subject to investigation for widespread corruption, most famously in the 1971 testimony of whistleblowing police officer Frank Serpico. In June 1975, after the city announced budget cuts downsizing the police force, officers distributed a pamphlet titled "Fear City" to arriving visitors, warning them to stay away. The opening of the Mammoth World Trade Center complex in 1972, however, was one of the few high points of the city's history at that time. Conceived by David Rockefeller and built by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey on the site of the Radio Row Electronics District in Lower Manhattan, the Twin Towers displaced the Empire State Building in Midtown as the world's tallest building. It was displaced in turn by Chicago's Sears Tower in 1973. Fiscal Crisis of 1975, edit. The 1970s were a low point in the city's modern history, and one of the lowest moments came when the New York Daily News reported the president's refusal to bail out the nation's largest city. He later relented. U.S. economic stagnation in the 1970s hit New York City particularly hard, amplified by a large movement of middle-class residents to the suburbs, which drained the city of tax revenue. In February 1975, New York City entered a serious fiscal crisis. Under Mayor Abraham Beame, the city had run out of money to pay for normal operating expenses, was unable to borrow more, and faced the prospect of defaulting on its obligations and declaring bankruptcy. The city admitted an operating deficit of at least $600 million, contributing to a total city debt of more than $11 billion, and the city was unable to borrow money from the credit markets. There were numerous reasons for the crisis, including overly optimistic forecasts of revenues, underfunding of pensions, use of capital allocations and reserves for operating costs, and poor budgetary and accounting practices. Another perspective given on this matter is that as the most capitalized city of the United States at that time, New York hosted an array of welfare and benefits for its people, including 19 public hospitals, mass transit facilities, and most importantly, New York City provided higher education for free with the municipal university system. The city government was reluctant to confront municipal labor unions. An announced hiring freeze was followed by an increase in city payrolls of 13,000 people in one quarter, and an announced layoff of 8,000 workers resulted in only 436 employees leaving the city government. The first solution proposed was the Municipal Assistance Corporation, which tried to pool the city's money and refinance its heavy debts. It was established on the 10th of June, 1975, with Felix Rohatyn as chairman, and a board of 9 prominent citizens, 8 of whom were bankers. In the meanwhile, the crisis continued to worsen, with the admitted city deficit reaching $750 million. Municipal bonds could be sold only at a significant loss to the underwriters. The MAC insisted that the city make major reforms, including a wage freeze, a major layoff, a subway fare hike, and charging tuition at the City University of New York. The New York State Legislature supported the MAC by passing a law converting the city sales tax and stock transfer tax into state taxes, which when collected were then used as security for the MAC bonds. The state of New York also passed a state law that created an emergency financial control board to monitor the city's finances, required the city to balance its budget within 3 years, and required the city to follow accepted accounting practices. But even with all of these measures, the value of the MAC bonds dropped in price, and the city struggled to find the money to pay its employees and stay in operation. The MAC sold off $10 billion in bonds. It failed to achieve results quickly, and the state came up with a much more drastic solution, the Emergency Financial Control Board, EFCB. It was a state agency, and city officials had only 2 votes on the 7-member board. The EFCB took full control of the city's budget. It made drastic cuts in municipal services and spending, cut city employment, froze salaries, and raised bus and subway fares. The level of welfare spending was cut. Some hospitals were closed, as were some branch libraries and fire stations. The labor unions helped out by allocating much of their pension funds to the purchase of city bonds, putting the pensions at risk if bankruptcy took place. A statement by Mayor Bean was drafted and ready to be released on the 17th of October, 1975, if the teachers' union did not invest $150 million from its pension funds in city securities. I have been advised by the controller that the City of New York has insufficient cash on hand to meet debt obligations due today, the statement said. This constitutes the default that we have struggled to avoid. The Beam statement was never distributed because Albert Shanker, the teachers' union president, finally furnished $150 million from the union's pension fund to buy Municipal Assistance Corporation bonds. 2 weeks later, President Gerald R. Ford angered New Yorkers by refusing to grant the city a bailout. Ford later signed the New York City Seasonal Financing Act of 1975, a congressional bill that extended $2.3 billion worth of federal loans to the city for 3 years. In return, Congress ordered the city to increase charges for city services, to cancel a wage increase for city employees, and to drastically reduce the number of people in its workforce. Rohatyn and the MAC directors persuaded the banks to defer the maturity of the bonds they held and to accept less interest. They also persuaded the city and state employee pension funds to buy MAC bonds to pay off the city's debts. The city government cut the number of its employees by 40,000, deferred the wage increases already agreed to in contracts, and kept them below the level of inflation. The loans were repaid with interest. A fiscal conservative, Democrat Ed Koch, was elected as mayor in 1977. By 1977-78, New York City had eliminated its short-term debt. By 1985, the city no longer needed the support of the Municipal Assistance Corporation, and it voted itself out of existence. Blackout, edit. The New York City blackout of 1977 struck on the 13th of July of that year and lasted for 25 hours, during which Black and Hispanic neighborhoods fell prey to destruction and looting. Over 3,000 people were arrested, and the city's already crowded prisons were so overburdened that some suggested reopening the recently condemned Manhattan Detention Complex. The financial crisis, high crime rates, and damage from the blackouts led to a widespread belief that New York City was in irreversible decline and beyond redemption. By the end of the 1970s, nearly 1 million people had left, a population loss that would not be recouped for another 20 years. To Jonathan Mahler, the chronicler of The Bronx is Burning, the clinical term for it, fiscal crisis, didn't approach the raw reality. Spiritual crisis was more like it. See also, edit. 1 American Urban History. 2 Timeline of New York City, 1950s-1970s. 3 1949 New York City mayoral election. 4 1953 New York City mayoral election. 5 1957 New York City mayoral election. 6 1961 New York City mayoral election. 7 1965 New York City mayoral election. 8 1969 New York City mayoral election. 9 1973 New York City mayoral election. 10 1977 New York City mayoral election. References, edit.
Good. Let's just continue reading. Let's stop this.